Randy.
All right, episode 21 of the Guerilla Social Work Podcast. Welcome to the show. We're going to switch up the intro a little bit. I have some company with me. We're going to try to freshen things up. So we're going to have the intro itself be a podcast episode.
No,
that's not true. Just a few minutes of three people.
I promise you, if you fast forward to like 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and you'll hit us talking about to the mighty Randi Juergens. And who is Randi Juergens, Jeff?
Randi Juergens is one of my favorite all-time probation officers. Worked with her for a number of years, and she's gracing us with her company, insight, knowledge, and background.
Yeah, she's a lovely lady. We had a really good conversation with her about some of the things that she thinks makes the clients more successful with regards to their probation and their parole. She shared some pretty cool stories with us. I think everybody will really enjoy this talk. And this episode is brought to you by, of course, Alpha Counseling and Treatment. Alpha is the largest and most respected provider of justice-involved clients, especially those who are convicted of a sexual offense. I'm just saying anybody who is dealing with sexual behavior problems, pornography addiction, anything of the above, or if you're referring a PMP agent, federal probation officer, Alpha is the ticket. We have superior performance, distinctive impact, lasting endurance. Those are the 3 pillars of success with Alpha. And where can you find us, Jeff? What's our website?
www.utahsbesttherapy.com.
No modesty involved in that whatsoever. No. utahsbesttherapy.com. So, do we do those without further ado type situation?
That's what I always struggle with. Like, how do you lead it?
Ready, set,
go.
go.
How do you just say, okay, enjoy?
No, you got to have, we got to find one that's ours, though.
1, 2, 3, go.
But it gets old when you use it every time. You got to have a pool of like 700 that you pull from.
Well, without further ado is silly.
It just sounds dumb.
Doesn't Dan Carlin say that like every time?
Yeah, usually I just go, all right, enjoy.
Have fun, folks.
Have fun, guys.
Have fun, folks.
Okay. Bye-bye. Other than that, we're rolling.
Oh, yeah.
We are rolling?
Oh, yeah.
Live with the mighty Randi Juergens. You glad to be here?
I am very happy to be here.
Yeah, we almost didn't happen.
It almost didn't.
Because
I
Jeff,
showed up at 8:30 in the morning.
I will take responsibility as the scheduler that I misled you through incompetence.
I was stressed all day about this, thinking I'd missed and I'd left you guys hanging. But
Well, part of that's intentional. We like to keep our guests a little on edge and like not really know what's coming.
Just don't even show up at the right time. That's on edge.
See, we show up 12 hours later than what you thought. 8:30 p.m., not a.m.
Yeah. We'll see you June 2nd.
Yeah.
Glendale, Arizona. All right.
Well, I'm not coming then.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So
I wish it was clever and intentional, but I just kind of blew it, honestly. Yeah.
lucky I've got my shit together.
You do. You do.
do.
Yeah.
And you were, and luckily I was paying attention.
Yeah.
See, this is the late stages of gingivitis starting to come through.
The final stage is
The
just,
late stages, like it's almost over.
Yeah, well, it's full on ginger onset. I've been afflicted for the last 36 years.
Yeah.
It's finally like crept into my bones.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just your journey, dude.
Yeah. Oh, don't say that stupid word, dude. It starts. See this. It starts with the freckles, right, and it infects your stupid skin.
That's the stage one. One.
Randy, you ever touch this guy's skin?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, don't.
Why would you have?
Don't.
Why would you touch my skin?
Well, because
You're trying to get me in trouble on this podcast.
Like you ever shook his hand? It's gross, dude. It's disgusting. You need to wear latex gloves.
Okay.
Yeah, you should see like his laptop. It looks hideous.
That's
like
a
it's
good tip.
the sweat is like literally eating through the plastic on his laptop. Like,
I
That was
can't believe
true.
Jeff is letting you guys get away with this.
Yeah, well, like I said, I don't disagree.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Yeah.
then it seeps into his bones, and then eventually he becomes translucent and then just fades away into dust.
Sounds like a superpower.
Yeah.
So I was going to say, it sounds like a superhero.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
No. Well, Justin and Randy are putting a positive spin on my affliction. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that's true. Remember that? Do you remember that when we went to Bonnaroo and we saw that translucent dude? I could like see he was so ginger, I could see his heart beating like through his chest. I was like, oh yeah, look at that.
It's like one of those anatomy things that they have in like any biology class where you can just like see their heart and their intestines.
Yeah, he didn't make it, but
You're talking the guy that was face down in the mud. Were you there that year? Or was that when it was me, you, and Aaron?
Yeah.
No, I was there. I was there for that.
It's kind of dark.
Do you know what
the water was up
Bonnaroo
over
is,
his head.
Randy?
No.
You don't seem like the type that it's like you ever been to a music festival?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which music festival have you gone to?
Oh, I don't. It's been years ago.
You seem like a country western lady. No, techno,
No.
Hip hop.
Techno,
Electric Daisy
rock.
Carnival, right? You've been to
Yeah.
those? We went to one of those before. It's
Oh,
pretty
that's the
crazy.
one where they wear the colored boots and the.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I felt like really out of place. I felt like more like a chaperone
Yeah.
as opposed to someone there.
Oh yeah. All the kids are really young.
Like a giant rave.
Well, what festival did you
right.
go to?
Well, I seen that in Vegas. A bunch of kids, I guess, or younger people were going.
Oh, you didn't go to it?
No, I didn't go to it.
Oh, okay.
It looked
Yeah.
like fun, but no.
It's a different world though, because like normally when we were there, because like I'm not a bad looking dude and I look okay with my shirt off, right? So I go down there, pull the old tricks and stuff like that. Jeff was too. You go down there and you know
I
what?
pulled no tricks.
You did too. You do it every concert. You almost got thrown out of Nine Inch Nails for taking your shirt off, you loser.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so we're down there and like, there was a lot of hot girls down there, but nobody wanted anything to do with us. They were all with like dudes who were wearing skinny jeans and looked like Skrillex. I was like, this is the new thing apparently. So then by day 2, I was like, all right, well, let's just not focus on any of
It
that
was
stuff.
kind of a rough crowd.
Dude,
The crowd I've seen.
Yeah.
kids, I like that music, but
Yeah.
man, it's a different beast of
Yeah.
people.
What's his name? Where's the rapper that wears the clock around?
Flava Flav?
Yeah. We were in front of him in
He
line to
was
get
there.
tacos. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was exactly as you would have expected.
I tried to get him to buy me a churro. He wasn't having it.
Yeah.
So reason we have you here, though, besides talking nonsense, is I guess you're actually, since we started off, you're probably one of the original probation officers I worked with.
Yeah.
Many years ago.
Pull the mic in a little closer. You can angle it if you need to, but you'll hear it when you hit like the sweet spot.
There we go.
Oh yeah, there we go.
There we
That's
go.
better. Yeah.
Yeah, almost kissing it.
So are we considering Randy a penitentiary pundit?
Yeah, of course. Randy's old school.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of one of the series that we have. We've had, so you're the first, a corrections officer, or not corrections officer, the first agent we've had. We've got a guy that was a former agent that's running for sheriff. We've had a few people that work at the jail.
Now he's a current agent.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
He's a supervisor.
Okay. I guess you're not the first.
I'm not.
Did you ever
There's
work
a
with
first
him?
something.
Adrian Eads?
Who?
Adrian Eads? You remember him at all? No?
No. He's an agent with AP&P now.
Supervisor.
Huh?
Yeah, he's running for sheriff
Weaver County Sheriff.
I don't know him.
coming up.
Don't know him.
Yeah. But in any case, I figured you'd be good to come on, talk about your experiences. Just, I think that our audience probably has no idea what you actually do for a living or what agents actually do.
Yeah.
And we really didn't get into the probation officer's actual job when Eads was on. We talked more about his ideas for sheriff and the jail and stuff. So I think it'll be pretty fresh stuff for anybody listening in. But you, like early before we started the podcast, you were talking about your approach with the sex offender population is decidedly different than your approach, or I guess than supervision with people in, I guess, under other forms of supervision. Like, can you talk about specifically kind of like what kind of stuff you look for as an agent?
Oh, they're totally different populations. And when I first was approached to take sex offenders, I just didn't want it. I think most agents act that way. They don't want to supervise sex offenders. And then I found it to be one of the most challenging things that I had done. There's a lot more manipulation that goes on, a lot more game playing that you always have to kind of be aware of. You don't see the drug use as often. And, when you have a drug offender, they come in and you can see the pock marks. So you can see that they've lost weight. They can't keep their jobs. There's all these signs that something's not right. Mm-hmm. Sex offenders don't always show that. So you really have to kind of dig deep and talk to them. And,
what kind of signs would you outwardly see in a sex offender?
That's true. Yeah, a lot more under the radar stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to see.
So like going to their homes was always a big deal and really looking at what was going on there. Sometimes you'd find, pornography or things that they shouldn't have. But of course, it's not laid out, so you got to search and you got to have a reason to search and just kind of stuff like that. A lot more surveillance I did, watching where they were going and what they were doing, different things like that. The supervision was totally different to be effective.
So when you're saying surveillance, like making sure that they're accountable to where they say they're going to be, like what the surveillance caught my attention. Like what type of stuff would you be looking for?
I probably shouldn't say offenders' names, but there was one that we had that would always go down to the crosswalk when the kids were getting out of school, the elementary students, the little elementary school that's right down the street here. And so I found him trying to talk to all the little kids as they go through the crosswalk.
Wow.
In his history, he had done that before, so I kind of knew that, and I knew he was living closer to a school than I'd like. He was just right outside the 1,000-foot radius, and I think I developed kind of a sick feeling, like something's not right here. I wouldn't always know exactly and go into their houses and searching, but then eventually something would raise its ugly head. So I would pick out those ones that I was having that feeling with, or that I seen different signs with. And those were the ones that I do more surveillance on.
So we're kind of talking about like a gut instinct type thing.
Sometimes, yeah.
What is that something that you feel like you just kind of naturally have, Randy, or is that did you develop that?
I think I developed it I think I might have naturally had an ability a little bit, but I think just working with offenders for so long, you develop it, and then working with sex offenders really developed it. I really had to have that.
Your spidey senses went off, told you this guy was up to stuff that he wasn't supposed to be, and your instincts proved right. And then you talked about going to their homes as well. So I don't know if this is true for you. One of the current Ogden AP&P agents said that he gets a little worried when their homes are wreck, dirty, cluttered, dishes in the sink piled up high, stuff everywhere. I think the idea behind that, like once upon a time, and it still might be true, we used to talk about how hygiene was directly tied in with cycles of behavior. And a lot of times when clients let their hygiene slip, or their, how they keep their house slip, that is indicative of their slipping elsewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's where you were going with it when you said you go to their house.
No.
Okay.
Not at all. I tried to look at people as like, if it were normal for his house to always be a mess or to be cluttered, some people live like that. And if that was his normal, how he presented all the time when I would go there, then that wouldn't alarm me.
So you would look more for consistency.
I would look, going to their house. What are they doing? Are they spending their time doing like their studies, or are they watching TV? What are they watching? I was always seeing what's on their TV. Sometimes looking at their phone, looking for pornography, looking for things. I really got to know their files and their background, and what, did they like little girls? Did they like little boys? Did they like them older? Did they, all those kind of things. And then, sometimes you just pick up on different things in the home that, like if they had a toy laying around that they shouldn't have, of course, I'm really going to question that, So things like that, it's hard to say exactly what. It would depend on the offender and what their background was.
Pretty individual. Yeah, it's one of those, if you, going back to Jeff, the comment you were making, like if someone's house was always dirty, but then they're always coming to their sessions, they pass their polygraph and all that. Yeah, I'm probably not going to worry. But if all of a sudden someone's house is like that, and all of a sudden they're missing sessions, and all of a sudden they're in and out of work, then like, okay, odds are something else is probably off too.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking for those odd behaviors that weren't always consistent.
Yeah, because if it's just a dirty house, then man, I'm probably in trouble too.
Right.
But yeah, if it's out of character, I think is a big part of that.
Yeah. So,
yeah,
and different. Even I had an offender who, when I went to his house, he had an invitation to like a family party or something, and I kind of questioned him. And he was coming in the next day for a visit, and before he left, he said to me, so he was leaving. He was walking out the door and he's like, I'm going to have a good weekend. Are you? And I was like, yeah. Like it was kind of a odd question. And I said, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm going to my barbecue. And he started leaving and I chased him out the door and I said, come back. Like, why are you telling me that? Well, the victim was going to be at the barbecue. But I think in a way, sex offenders sometimes tried to get permission. Like, oh yeah, I told my PO that. So I can't get in trouble. But he really didn't tell me. He left out a big part of it. But just they played games like that a lot, and you just have to really. I
gotta say that's a lot more sharp than I would be. I'd be like, yeah, have a good weekend, bro. Like, I wouldn't even have thought of that.
Initially, I'm sure the first 2 years I missed so much. It took time to see those things and to kind of pick up on them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But then I started questioning everything they said, but I realized it worked, and it was a different way of supervising it. I never had to do that with the drug offenders.
Because your guys' I mean, a probation parole officer's basic function is, I mean, in a lot of ways, just to, this is a person who has been incarcerated for a period of time, or not. Maybe they've been put on probation, for a period of time. In other words, you're responsible and tasked with monitoring their behavior in the community and to ensure that they're complying with either court orders or parole conditions, correct?
Correct.
And I think for a lot of people listening to this, I mean, particularly some of our offenders, because some of our offenders do listen to this podcast. And in a lot of ways, I can see from their perspective, because they share it with me often, that they think that probation officers, parole officers are out to get them, that they want them to fail. And from your perspective, I mean, is that more of a myth? Is that true? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's that probation officers want dudes to violate and go back to prison or anything. Right. So, I mean...
I think I could see where offenders would feel like that. I think people get into, in Utah, probation and parole officers were law enforcement certified, so we're police officers. Mm-hmm. And when you hire, I think a parole officer needs to be able to wear dual hats. Sometimes you got to be a therapist, sometimes you got to be an officer, sometimes, and there's some agents that I think really got into the system wanting to, kick butt and take names. And if you get an agent like that, I've seen that. Like, you need to help people grow and do better, and when they do, kind of support them and carry them along their way. But I've seen that not everybody had that mentality.
Well, I've seen a fair amount of agents, I think maybe that were just starting out here, probably maybe recently in Ogden, that come in not knowing how to work with sex offenders specifically, be pretty open to that feedback from us. Like somebody would slip up or have a violation or something, and they would reach out to me, and their initial reaction was, well, I got to go get him, right? I got to go pick him up. This is dangerous. And I would usually frame it as like, no, actually, this is a good thing, and he's talking about it. And at first, I could tell the hesitation, which was the same feeling I had starting out. But now they've come around to, oh, okay, yeah, he's talking about, okay, that's cool, and they're more supportive of that. But they've done, AP&P across the board has done really well just being open to that when we reach out to them, putting our input on it.
I think you're right. And, I don't think things have changed there now, but we never got any training. Like, nobody said, you're taking over a sex offender caseload and it's different, let's train you. Yeah. Like, it was all done through experience. And we were guided to supervise them in the same way we did everybody else.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Experience, I learned, this isn't working. This is not working. But I do think the more you educate them and let them know why, when people say sex offenses, they immediately freeze up. Like, that's a bad word, and no matter what, they're dangerous, and that's not true. That's not true.
Yeah, I think the general public, when you hear sex offense, that's synonymous with child molester. Yeah. Like, everybody thinks that.
The worst case scenario.
Right. Yeah. Which, I mean, is sometimes true, about 30% of our client population at least, but not necessarily either. And not necessarily dangerous either at this point.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So obviously, really effective communication skills. I mean, your ability, so the idea that I am going to kick ass and take names, and and I'm here to clean this up or whatever. That's not really because in your estimation, what's the overall goal of a probation officer or a parole officer? I mean, what's the best outcome if I'm working with a client?
I think the overall goal is to, make sure they're abiding by their court order, make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be successful and move on and get out of the system. I think that is the goal of the Department of Corrections. I just don't think it always panned out that way in the end.
Yeah.
But I do think that's the goal, and that's what I found satisfactory in it. My satisfaction came from seeing some people succeed and do better, and I think in probation and parole we don't always measure success the way it should be. For maybe a drug offender who stops using for a year and holds a job and pays his bills, but then has a miss up and goes back to prison, maybe surviving for that year and doing well, that's a success. But we view it as a failure when they go back.
Yeah.
That's really cool to hear you say that.
And I think we see that with sex offenders too. There were some people that just had, their thinking was off and everything was off, and you guys would work with them, and And I could see them come along, even like you said, admitting to things that they were thinking. You know, I've been visualizing about this, or I've been doing this, and they know it's wrong, and they're talking to me about it, and they're talking to you guys. That's a success. That's not a failure.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it's really hard to get everybody to see it like that.
Well, you were talking that as an agent takes over a sex offender caseload, there's really not much specific training given, and so everybody's kind of beholden to the same hysteria and not really knowing what to make. Cause like, again, there are going to be some things that are serious issues, and there's going to be some things that aren't. And no one's really told you if you're a new sex offense specific, probation officer, which is which.
Right.
Now it's kind of cool hearing you talk about how you have this view, and, you know, and you've always been easy to work with as a therapist. Clients always had positive things to say. I mean, they would say you're fair. That's probably about as good of a compliment as you're ever going to get from a client.
Probably.
Yeah.
I'll take it.
They said you're fair, you know, and it's either fair or that person's a dick. Those are the two categories that POs get, you know? Yeah.
It's understandable.
You fell into the fair category some of the time, most of the time, all the time.
I know I didn't always.
No, most of the time you did. But you have such a keen eye for it. You're talking about this Sherlock Holmes level of undercover investigation stuff while you're over there. And, how do you pull that off? How do you maintain, I guess, rapport, or not a friendship, but a relationship with a client while you're simultaneously assuming that they're up to something? Or is that maybe I'm mischaracterizing what you're saying?
I think that rapport is the key. I think if you don't develop a good rapport and they close down every time they come and see you and they don't talk to you, you've already ended your job with them. You can't take them any further. I think I always tried to put them. We all make mistakes. I make mistakes. Some are more severe than others. Absolutely. Some have more consequences than others. But like putting their guard down and getting them to talk to you and letting them, I think for me, I always wanted them to know I supported them. And I did. I truly did. Like I'd go out of my way to support them if they needed something and I could do it. And I think so a lot of it comes in action, developing that rapport, and then your action. If they come in and said, I need you, okay, I'll do whatever I can. And sometimes I wasn't able to pull it off, but I always tried, and I think they knew that.
Well, I liked how you put that as far as the mistake things, because ultimately they tend to view a PO as it's the last ditch effort. My mistake is a big violation. I'm going back. They're there just to catch that, where not necessarily. Maybe the early mistake is, hey, your place is kind of dirty. What's going on here?
Yeah.
I want to help you catch those earlier mistakes so they don't lead to bigger mistakes down the road, which is much more about that. So where you get to know them or we get to know them, we can catch on to that early stuff where I think they can feel hounded. Like, this is annoying. Why do they care why my place is dirty? And it's like, well, if they hold you to that standard, they're actually protecting you from violating down the road. They're not letting it hit last ditch ever. You know, shit hits the fan. They're catching it much earlier on. I
don't know if you guys get this, but you know, sex offenders would always have a hard time telling me or any parole officer what they did.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know it's an uncomfortable thing, and so I don't know if you guys had a different experience in treatment, if they'll, you know, when you do your disclosures, if they'll just tell you what they did and be upfront about it. But that was always a big thing for me, because I want to know what they did so that if I see things, you know, if they use visualization a lot, or if they use, you know, then I would make the conversation easier down the road by me bringing it up and asking, rather than relying on them to tell me. Mm-hmm. And I think that made it easier for them to tell me when things were going wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, one thing when I worked with some of your clients, or these would be your
clients. You can
yeah, sure. There we
clients,
go. I don't know. Okay, probationers or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. So, was your skill to interact with them effectively and efficiently, and it was done in simple stuff, showing them respect and courtesy, because you kind of get in this weird loop, like kind of a broken feedback loop. In other words, like offenders will do the same thing, because they're saying, well, I'll show him respect when he shows me respect. I'm like, well, and then the same thing happens with some officers, and I'm like, well, somebody's got to give. Like it can't be. Right. So again, I think that you guys being the professional, I think that you recognize communication is a two-way street, and listening, understanding what they're saying is really crucial. But asking questions is a big piece of that too, because POs, I think they have to interact with a wide range of individuals. It's not just like, especially with the offenders. I mean, all kinds of different intellectual levels. Then I got to talk to these wacko therapists. Then I got to talk to my supervisor. And so you need to communicate well and operate, with all those people operating on a different level.
And then talk to the victims and talk to the mothers of the offenders and talk to,
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think those communication skills are really important, but I also think that the critical thinking skills that you bring to the table in terms of like, can I have logical reasoning and, use these critical thinking skills, like kind of Justin's referencing that, okay, something's going on and, what's the next logical step? Like, I love that you said, what does success actually look like? Because sometimes we, create these standards that are just way too high for some of these people, and some of these rough around the edges outcomes are going to be as about as good as it can get.
Yeah.
And I've always said, well, if the expectation I tell my clients, if the expectation was you're not going to do anything, why are you on probation? So mistakes are going to happen. We need to learn from those. But I think being able to tell your PO, that's a really critical skill. And I think the PO aids that by being more open and communicative with the clients as well.
Yeah. And I think then the client owns up more. They take ownership for what they did wrong, or it doesn't become this push-pull thing where I'm blaming you and telling you did everything wrong and and the offender's defending themselves. A lot of times they would take responsibility for what they did, so.
Yeah, I think they're much more apt to if the and when I say critical thinking, I really appreciated that whatever punishment was coming, because sometimes these guys are just they feel like they do something and they're like, what? I'm getting in trouble for that? I'm like, well, yes.
Got to be consequences.
Behaviors have consequences in the real world. Fancy that, right? You got to live by the same rules as us. But I think if the consequence doesn't match the behavior, then me as the offender, I'm going to have a hard time connecting the dots there.
Yeah.
And it's not going to make sense to me of why I shouldn't do this again, because then I'm going to say, Randy's doing a power grab.
Are you meaning in terms of severity? Like the consequence is perceived by the offender to be way more extensive than the behavior that
Correct.
Yeah, than it was warranted.
So like our clients that get super upset about getting in trouble for pornography. We come across clients that it's legal. What's the big deal? And then I guess we always point back to the probation agreement, which is what AP&P enforces. I'm like a random thought just jumped into my head. Randy, there's a concept that we talk to our clients about. We teach it in group all the time. And the concept was actually developed by one of your former clients.
Really?
Yeah. One of our former clients. And I'll tell you off the podcast. Yes. After you left or whatever, he was transferred to another probation officer, and he ended up getting, he got his girlfriend at the time, fiance, whatever, pregnant. And in the months leading up to the birth, the new probation officer, asked us, Alpha, to help the client get a safety plan for the new child. It's like, hey, you're going to have a new child living in the home. You have group A stipulations. We need to plan for this and plan around it. And this client, he had a rough past, but he'd pulled it together quite a bit and was doing really well on parole. And he hit a point, like once he was told to get that safety plan in place so he could be around his soon to be daughter, he really dug his heels in.
I know who you're talking about.
Do you? Yeah. Yeah. He didn't like the idea of it. He didn't like the implication that, okay, and maybe for the listeners, so a safety plan is basically just like it is what it sounds like, but essentially for a client that's not allowed to be around anybody under the age of 18, that there's some conditions that have to be in place before that person would be allowed to. One of those is a safety plan. And so he said, well, if I fill out a safety plan saying that I can be around my daughter, I'm implying that I'm a monster or that I'm a threat or that I'm going to do something to my daughter. There's no way I'd ever do that. And he would say, I thought I've proved myself. AP&P thinks I'm still this. You guys think I'm still this. And he was having a tough time with it because, again, he would say, I'm tacitly endorsing the idea that I still have this problem. I would never touch my daughter. So week after week, he resisted bringing this assignment in. And finally one day he came prepared, and there's the assignment. There's a safety plan. It's written up really well, right to our standards, no minimizing. He wrote things on there that I know was hard for him to write, including I won't be in charge of bathing my daughter. And I know that was tough for him to write. And I asked him, like, well, what prompted you to, why the change of heart? And he said, well, I just reframed how I'm looking at it. He said that there's personal risk factors that actually matter for me. And for this client, he said, making fast money and, girls that I can, pimp out. And he said, those are big risk factors for me. Drugs are a big risk factor for me. Anything having to do with quick ways to make money and come up, those are big risk factors for me. He said, going to a park or bathing my daughter, those are not personal risk factors. They're appointed risk factors. They've been appointed to me by APMP. And so he said, it's not a risk factor that if I violate this rule, it means I'm going to create a victim out of my daughter. It's a risk factor for me. And then if I violate an appointed risk factor, I go back to jail. So he said, by framing it that way in my mind, I was able to not personalize it and just follow the rules that I don't think, you or Randy, want me to do. And so he would since then, we've made that like a part of our curriculum. We teach appointed risk versus personal risk. And I kind of want to know, and from a probation officer's perspective, first off, I want to know does it bug you at all that we're saying that some rules don't put you at risk, but you damn well better do them anyway? Or like what's your reaction to hearing that story?
No.
Considering it's one of your dudes.
Yeah, and I think, whatever way it has to work, and if that's what they need to do, I don't know that I really think that's minimizing. I think therapeutic wise, and maybe you guys can tell me this, I always thought, everybody has like a path. You just don't wake up one day and go, I'm going to commit a sex offense. It doesn't happen that way.
Right.
There's things that happen. And I think as long as, like with an offender like that, if we're thinking of the same person, I would be more concerned about the things that he did to commit his offense. And if having a child were, any part of that pathway to the offense, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like if it was, and if it wasn't, I wouldn't be so worried. I don't know that I would care why he didn't, as long as he wasn't putting himself at risk. I always tried to point out too, like, you're a sex offender. You have this on your record. You've got to be careful what you do if you want to be around for your kids, because anybody could claim anything and people believe it about sex offenders, so I always tried to frame it too, like you're doing what's best for you to be around your kids and your family. So no, I don't think that would bother. It would bother me if I felt it were a risk factor, something that led to his crime, and he was minimizing it and trying to get away from that. Mm-hmm. That would bother me. Does that make sense?
Your answer is pretty well in line with what we do. So you're almost answering the way that like a therapist would answer. So that's kind of handy. And because, certainly if I were having a client fill out a safety plan and either through lack of awareness of their actual risk factors or through intentionally minimizing those risk factors, that would be something that we would address in therapy as well. So basically your answer is like pretty well on board with what we're doing.
The one thing I think I learned is from being a parole officer is, we can't put blanket statements on everything. Like you have to look at every single person individually and what they did. Mm-hmm. 'Cause you'd think you'd figure them out, and then they come in and they surprise you in what they say and what they've been through and what led them to that. So, and I think with sex offenders particularly, they've got a story and you need to be able to hear it. I know some agents don't want to hear it, and that was a big conversation we used to have at our office with the other agents who supervise sex offenders. Some of them didn't want to know any of that stuff, and I kept going, well, how can you supervise them if you're not willing to hear that stuff?
Yeah, well, the thing that you're talking about is really good to hear, because I'm never in a position that I think we undermine some of their conditions and some of the things that they have, because I think what we try to say is, look, I understand that this isn't necessarily a problem for you. So the question then becomes, if it's not a problem for you, then why are we arguing about you following this rule? We're simply, is this a little bit of CYA, kind of cover my ass type thing? Sure. But the thing is there's been precedent set by previous guys in this position. And it's not to suggest that you are going to do this. What we're saying is this is something that it applies to everybody equally. And you and I, like, the reason why we're having this conversation is because you're choosing to focus on this. The actual risk factors that make a difference are this and this and this, not this. So, like, sometimes guys an example would be sometimes guys have an alcohol clause. And I never even had a problem with alcohol. What the hell are you talking about? I don't, and I'm like, I don't know what the deal is. I don't know why you have an alcohol clause anyway. But you know what? The thing is it's there. And if you choose to violate that, I'm not really concerned about the alcohol. What I'm concerned about is the reason where you're having logic saying I can violate this rule and it's going to be okay, knowing that that's going to get you in trouble. Yeah. Pornography is a great one because guys, it's so minimized in the sex offender population that we work with. Like, what's the big deal? Right. And I say, well, look, there's no evidence to suggest that sex offenders who watch pornography are more likely to reoffend sexually. I know that. But what we do know is that sexual preoccupation certainly does lend to guys reoffending sexually. You all know you're not allowed to watch pornography. So if there's a rule in place saying that you do this, you're going to get in trouble, potentially go back to prison. And then you still choose to violate that. Ought you not question the fact that you're doing that? Yeah. Like, you should say, what? Why am I making this decision?
The problem is that in and of itself, more so than the porn.
That should scare you that you know the stakes and you still chose to do it. How, if it's not that important, how could it be that important? I mean, it's something that could send you to prison. And you're telling me it's not important and then you still choose to engage in it?
It's probably the same thinking that I used to hop into the carpool lane when I hit traffic. You know what I mean? Yeah.
What, you watch porn in the carpool lane?
Clearly, yeah.
That
don't you,
weirdo?
Yeah. Hey, I get bored on that commute. Yeah.
So in bringing that up, I always like didn't know what to do with porn because I always felt like most sex offenders that's kind of like the gateway drug. Mm-hmm. Is it or not?
It depends on how we're talking about it. So again, kind of with what Mace was saying, that. All right. Rewinding a bit, a few years, we were at a conference and researchers were up there saying that there's no causal link between pornography and sexual reoffense, which I didn't want to hear any part of. But he was right. There's not. So, really? Yeah. Looking at, if we're just saying that looking at pornography in and of itself, is that a predictor of sexual reoffense? No. But we look at the willingness to look at pornography anyway, despite there being severe sanctions in place, as being indicative of sexual preoccupation, which that becomes the problem.
So it's a sexual preoccupation more than.
Well, that, and sometimes the route I go, depending where it's a little more case by case, is if you're willing to keep pursuing that, even though you know there's consequences, not so much of just stop. What else is going on in your life that we probably should address? Like what are you escaping? What are you avoiding? Yeah. Even if it's not going to end in quote unquote a sexual offense, but maybe it's going to end in a violation of some way. Like, are you not dealing with stress well? Are you not dealing with loneliness well, or whatever it is? And that's the outlet. We need to rewind a little bit and say, well, what is leading up to it?
So you're looking at pornography as a coping skill used to deal with a deeper life issue, to cope. But with it being a coping skill that's not adaptive, you focus on what are you using? What about what's going on in your life that you're still choosing to use this? Even though
what's building up where the outlet is this, whether it's a boredom thing or it's just loneliness, an emotion dysregulation, or a bunch of different things. If I can't avoid that at the risk of getting kicked out of treatment and going to prison, something's going on. It's just like you were saying. You don't just wake up. It's just also I want to violate today. I'm bored. I want to violate. No, something's going on. Something's driving that decision.
And now that you say that, that's one of the key things I always look for too. And if something was going on with them that stressed them out, like maybe they lose their job, maybe they're fighting with their family, that always seemed to be a key to me. Like, watch what else is going on, because they seem to go back to the sex offender behavior maybe, or do things.
Well, yeah, no.
Sure. Maybe. Is it kind of their outlet or?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, one of the things that we try to get these guys to learn is the life history factors that led up to their offense. So, past history of abuse, past criminal history, things that they've been through, and then lifestyle factors, stuff they're currently doing that, perpetuates them being in this mode of living, this lifestyle. And, pornography use can sort of be in both columns, really. And if we have a client, and again, I'm super generalizing here, but I mean, how many clients have you had that they have no idea how to talk to women their age? Right, you know what I mean? They're lonely. They're kind of dorky.
Yeah.
They're not quite sure how to be.
You can see why they connected with someone younger.
And exactly. And so that's the pattern their offense takes is that they actually acted out hands-on with someone younger. And in the meantime, to curb the loneliness and to quell the boredom and all these different things, they look at pornography in the meantime. And what that allows for them to do is to stay in their basement. Yep. And not venture out and not deal with without pornography as an outlet. Now all of a sudden, oh geez, I better go meet an actual human, to fulfill that drive,
which
or whatever
is a lot
it is.
more difficult.
Yeah, it's way more. Yeah, I have to leave my house. I have to fundamentally alter my day-to-day interactions, which is altering the lifestyle factors. Which then, if we can get the client to the point that now he's daring to go out and he's got himself a date and he's going on. He's living a happy, healthy, productive lifestyle. He's not trapped in his parents' basement playing World of Warcraft for 12 hours, looking at pornography for the other 12. Like that. Then we're going somewhere.
Yeah.
And so pornography becomes the thing that we address as a symptom of a larger behavior that could be life history, lifestyle, something like that.
Yeah.
So how do you guys? That was one challenge I always had. With sex offenders, they can't go do certain things, and they can't go to certain movies, and they can't go where children congregate, and they can't do family things because of that. So, and then part of the parole agreement is that they can't associate with people who have committed felons and all of that. But sex offenders don't generally sex offend together, right? So we're drug offenders. There was a reason to not have them associating with each other because they're going to use dope together, right? But
precisely.
Sex offenders don't do that. And they need that connection with other people. We all need that connection with other people. So I always struggled in trying to find things where they could connect with people and have a positive network of people. And I think that was one of the hardest things.
They finally got that right.
Yeah.
They did?
They did.
What did they do?
They allow it.
They allow it.
Really?
Yeah,
with sex offenders?
Mm-hmm.
That's
well,
awesome.
and the other thing that we do to address that more directly, before the podcast started, we were talking about the University of Cincinnati Corrections Institute. And one of the things that we do on a regular basis now is teach them social skills and role play those social skills.
Oh, that's
because
awesome.
their social skills, in a lot of ways, contributed a ton to the reasons why they got to where they were. Yeah. I mean, so one of the things that we talked on another podcast earlier, we were talking about like pedophilia and how that kind of comes about, right? And we were saying that your sexual arousal doesn't change over time, it expands. In other words, if I'm an adolescent and that's when I start to show attraction towards the opposite sex or whatever my orientation is, I'm just recognizing that now I have an interest in another person sexually. Well, that doesn't, it's not like that changes as an adult. It expands over time. So I always give the analogy of like ice cream, right? Like if you had to guess what was the first flavor of ice cream you ever tasted when you were a 3-year-old, what do you think it probably was? Probably chocolate or vanilla, right? But what's your favorite flavor now?
Mudslide.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Good stuff, right? I like chocolate chip cookie dough. What do you like? Some stupid
mint chocolate chip cookie.
Man, I'm telling you, the Tonight Dough is Jimmy Fallon's brand of Ben and Jerry ice cream.
That's yeah. See, but it's not like you don't like chocolate, right?
No.
Of course you still like chocolate, but it expands because now I like texture. I like these additional flavors. My palate develops over time. And we want the same thing because for example, let's say I became sexually active when I was 16. Okay, fine, whatever. When I'm 32, I can still have fond memories of, when I became sexually active when I was 16. But I'm not attracted to 16-year-olds anymore because as I've grown, I've been reinforced with same age, folks over time. Right. These guys, it doesn't happen because for whatever reason, the social skills go to shit.
I think that's awesome.
And then when I become an adult, what do I have? I can't allow that to expand further because now I can't get a person who's same age to interact with me. So developing those social skills is crucial. So that's a big piece about.
And it makes them more safe.
Mm-hmm, it does.
It makes them more safe.
Right. And we want them to, because the best measure, the best protective mechanism against deviant sexual behavior is healthy sexual behavior, rewarding, healthy, consensual sexual behavior with another adult in a rewarding relationship. That's ultimately what we want. But yeah, it's. I think teaching them about that is crucial. Like understanding, okay, if I understand why I need to follow this rule, I'm much more apt to follow this rule. Because that's going back, I was like, if they can't make that connection, I think they're much less likely to follow it. And then they're more resistant. Because there was a guy I worked, because what's your obligation in terms of, maybe it's changed, but when you were working APNP, how often did you have to make a field contact with that client?
Oh, like once a month was minimum.
So once a month, and then like what happened like if they weren't home? So if you guys worked opposite hours because they worked, and how did you make that work?
Kind of caseload management. I would try to keep going back until I caught them home.
Yeah.
Sometimes just depending on how many people you had to see and what was going on, and you weren't able to. But at least once a month, usually twice a month if I could.
Yeah.
Especially with the sex offender caseload.
So I had a client one time, and he was at home. So he had working hours, and he didn't get home till 7. Mm-hmm. And he told his PO that I don't get home till 7. And his PO said, well, I need to make a field contact with you. And he'd come by and put his card there to show that he was there.
Right.
And then he said, well, I know, but I work until 7, so I can't. I don't know what to tell you. And the PO said, okay, I'm coming by. And he couldn't tell him when he was coming by because it doesn't have to be random.
It needs to be random.
So my client he said, I'm coming by, and if you're not there, then I'm gonna make you move out. And
he can't do that.
So my client was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna have to go to the homeless shelter because I can't. I was like, how does that make me more safe? So he was having a hard time. And eventually he figured out it was like going to be in this 3-day stretch, and he took 3 days off work and he was home.
Oh my heck.
I know. And I didn't understand it myself, but you see where, and this agent's no longer, he's no longer with APNP, this client's long graduated, but he was having a hard time connecting the dots there. And he's like, this guy's just pulling a power play.
Well, I don't know why. I mean, I would go out at midnight. I would stay out till midnight. There should be no reason for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why, I mean, we watched.
Unless they were put on a curfew. Unless he had a violation and he was on a curfew, or
he was kind of a smart ass. I mean, the client was. He was. I mean, he's funny, but he's a smart ass. But he wasn't resistant, and he would say. I mean, it was more so like, oh, here's a rule. Oh, okay, never mind, and he just would follow it. There are no problems with him. He just wouldn't. I mean, he just said, well, I'm not home at that time. I don't know what you want me to do, you know? And it was really weird to me because as a therapist, I was like, I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to tell you what's going through that person's head and help you kind of cope with this. And it is sometimes hard to just say, oh, it is what it is. I hate telling clients that. Yeah. That's like the worst, you know? But like the pornography things, I like it because we recently, I had them watch that. You should Google this if you have a chance. That? It's like 25 minutes long, but it's worth it. Have you ever seen the last interview with Ted Bundy prior to his?
I've read, yeah.
Okay. So you've seen that video?
I've seen it
was like less than 24 hours before he was executed. Mm-hmm. And I watched that, and every time I watch it, that guy is so full of shit, dude. Like he is. Like his leg.
How many times do you watch that, weirdo?
Well, it's in
every time. It's like a nightly tradition. All right, Dexter.
No, it's in groups, you know. But like, if you watch that compared to like a Charles Manson video, like Charles Manson, you're like, okay, this
what
guy's
do you
a
do
whack
with your
job.
free time, man?
Yeah.
These are in groups. You dummies.
First 48 and
just wake up and watch that interview.
But if you watch that interview, like a big thing is he uses language, but then he totally backs out of it because he's like, no, I want to be clear, you know. Porn, I'm not holding porn responsible. And when he's talking to, like he closes his eyes to make it more serious, you know. He's like, and he's like,
he's like an actor.
Well, he is,
yeah.
and he is,
exactly.
He is awfully charismatic and well spoken. But he's like, and it formed like a different entity inside of me, and I lost control. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, dude. How can you say you took responsibility and did this? But that was a huge moment in American history, and I think that turned it to like porn made me do it. Yeah. So if I watch porn, then I'm going to be Ted Bundy, right?
Yeah.
And that's where in the doctor that was in there was kind of going along with that. So when you were referencing the gateway drug earlier, you know, there's plenty of people that we probably all know that have smoked marijuana their entire lives and never done anything else, right? And people are perfectly capable of that. So the morality behind pornography tends to be a really crappy argument if I get into that with a client. like the morals of it. I don't know.
It's
really
not winnable either.
Right.
Yeah.
The symptoms of when I say, look, you guys, here's what I really want you to question is this idea of sexual preoccupation. Think about this. Just think. If I tell you don't do this one thing, and if you do this one thing, you forfeit your freedom, and then you go and do that, you ought to be terrified of engaging in that behavior. I don't care what it is. If I told you don't eat a Snickers bar while you're on probation, and then you're like, oh, I gotta have that Snickers bar. Like, dude, you gotta be like, what is up with this Snickers bar? Like,
the value of the Snickers bar is really a lot.
Correct.
Versus,
right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, client, that seems to resonate more with clients is when, because then it's in their best interest. Otherwise, they go the route that Mace was going with, kind of, the Ted. They think it's in place with the Ted Bundy thing, or they'll reference the church and just think it's like a moral thing, like like sex is bad, porn is bad, and like way more mileage out of these guys when we stop trying to convince them that they're on the cusp of creating a new victim because they're looking at porn or because this or that. It's well, I mean, Mace worded it well. It's that gets way more buy-in.
Yeah. I could see that.
Well, and that's where the conversation comes in with understanding the difference between those appointed risk and personal risk, because it turns into sometimes they go like off the rails and they say, well, I went and saw. I had a guy who went and saw that movie Gone Girl. You ever saw that?
Uh-huh.
Oh, so good.
Good show. Good show.
You were rooting for the girl in that, weren't you? You're all, get that son of a bitch.
Yeah. Of course.
He deserves everything that's coming to him.
That movie got like every couple into a fight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, you watch that movie and you like, if you went to a movie with like your significant other, you're sitting there and you look at each other, you're like, so should we just call this quits?
Yeah. So we're done, right?
Yeah, I was engaged. I was like, I don't know. Maybe this isn't a good idea.
If that's the case. But there was so he went and saw this and he didn't really know that there was nudity, and there's only like one scene in there. There was
pretty gnarly though.
No, not the murder scene. That is gnarly, but she's not nude in that. You never see any nudity in that. It's partial, but then there's that. It's when he's hooking up with that model. Oh, yeah. Anyway, and he said, I saw, it was actually one of your clients that came back and told me about this. He went to Brewski's to watch, or Broovies to watch it. Broovies to watch it. And he came back because it's a bar, kind of, so there's 21 and older, so it's safe and whatever. He came back and I was saying, well, okay, so, I mean, tell me a little bit about that. Did you like what you saw? Okay, oh, is she an adult? Congratulations for being an adult heterosexual male. Like, what did you, and I said, what I would be concerned with is not the fact that you were attracted to an adult female that was nude on TV that is attractive. That's a good thing because, again, if I'm trying to keep you away from children, I want to reinforce that.
Right.
What I would be concerned with is, did you go back every day of the week to go watch Gone Girl again, and then maybe snap a couple photos with your phone, and then go back home and then use that as for purposes of masturbation or something like that? Now we got a problem.
Drawing that distinction is important.
Those are symptoms of sexual preoccupation. There, like Jeff and I had a mutual client, and you look at there's another movie reference. You ever seen Freddy versus Jason?
No.
Awful movie, but equally
Freddy Krueger? Is that
of course.
One?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That was like every kid's dreams, like Freddy versus Jason. You know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of like the Chuck Liddell Vanderlei Silva fight. It was way too long, and by the time that they had the fight, it's like these are just two old dudes now.
It was more sad.
By the time you got it, you're all, finally, like I
felt bad for
I'm
him.
30.
10 years past their prime.
But there's like, in that movie, there is a snippet, and I'm not kidding, a 2-second image of nudity. And the client that we worked with, your client, he violated because of similar stuff when he got out. But he would fast forward to this part and watch this over and over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And he queued up on pornography on his polygraph, right? And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not pornography. Well, okay, you're taking a movie that was intended to show this little snippet of this, and unfortunately, there was one boob in there or whatever, and you turned it into pornography by the function of it. And now we're talking about sexual preoccupation.
This one boob wasn't even both?
Is one.
Got jibbed.
I know this because this because I was like, wait a minute, is there nudity in that? And I had to fast forward, and I was like, oh, there it is. Yeah, all right. So yeah, it is. I think if we can distinguish that, and even I always liked and appreciated when I worked with you that you were open to understanding those things, because the communication between the officer and the therapist was crucial. If we didn't present as a united front, then I don't think the clients were nearly as successful. Yeah. So
I agree, and I think that there's struggles in that area, and I think the more, especially with sex offender caseloads, that you can communicate with the therapist and we can all be on one team, the more effective we're going to all be in that.
I wonder, because, and you guys can help me out here, but I kind of, this is my pitch when I tell them that, because it is kind of an elegant system. I mean, I'm telling them from the gate, I go over confidentiality, and I tell them all the reasons why I'd have to break their confidentiality. And then I let them know ahead of time, full disclosure. I say, look, if you tell me about a violation, I'm going to tell your PO. The end, right? It's like, well, how am I ever going to tell you about anything? And I say, well, look, it's not like that, though. It's not as if I say, hey, Randy, you got to know what this guy's doing. You know, it's wrapped in a nice little bow and sent to them in the way, because if you're coming to me and genuinely asking for help and saying, hey, I screwed up this weekend and this happened, and I say, Randy, unfortunately, so-and-so did this, but I feel like at this point he's trying to work through these issues. I think violating him and discharging him would be, counterproductive. I think we got to continue working with him. I know you guys are going to have sanctions on your end, so off we go. Let me know what you think. So when I say, if I do it that way, the PO is much less likely to, violate. And we usually give you guys weekly updates. That's why it's not, you're sitting, you don't hear a word for a peep from a therapist for 6 months, and then all of a sudden you violate, and you have to ask the question, well, what else is he up to? Well, I already know because I've been communicating with this. Do you feel like that's an effective way of getting the message across to the therapist or to the client that if you tell me these things, I'm going to have to tell your PO, but you know what? The reason why we do that is because they need to know these things to reinforce the conditions, and that's why we're trying to move you along.
I think it's probably the best way you could do it. But I talked about the relationship with me and whoever I was supervising. You have to have that relationship with the treatment provider also. So we would have to be able to discuss things like how is this violation going to be handled? And, in some areas, the parole officer's hands are tied. Like, if he were to have had contact with a victim or something, I mean, some of those things are just, we have to do something.
Correct.
But the majority of the things that I came across weren't like that. Right. And through that conversation, and then I always felt like through a conversation, even when Jeff and I would work together, like I knew he knew about it. I knew he was on it. I knew he'd let me know if I needed to take my supervision up a step. And I think just building that rapport, but I don't know how else you would work that other than telling them like you would.
Yeah, because they can't.
In respect, if you've got an officer who doesn't understand the sex offending and doesn't understand that.
They may
like there's a taboo on sex offenses, and there's some agents that won't even look at the file or want to know about it. And so, like you said, society goes, a sex offender, no matter what they do, they look at porn, they're a risk, they need to go back to prison. You'll have some agents that think that too.
Right, because the dude can't come in and say, Mace, so I murdered somebody, but I really want to work through this, and so I thought I'd let you know. I can't be like, Randy, I think sending him to prison would be a bad idea because
we got this safety plan.
We're trying to find out where the body is.
Won't kill any more people.
Well, and I think stepping outside yourself in a session and telling a guy that you empathize with his point of view, because going back to the movie thing, because I've had even recently guys come in and say, my PO stopped by and he says I have to get rid of any movie that shows nudity. And first thought is, I think it's not taking sides, because I think sometimes they expect that, like, well, it's just what you have to do and your PO is right, suck it up, which just builds up a wall. Right. And you also don't have to do the opposite of like, are you serious? That is stupid. Yeah. You don't want to do that. Where sometimes I tell them like, that does suck, man. I would hate to have to do that too. Like, but I get what he's doing. He's just trying to keep you safe, even if you don't agree with why, and maybe it could have gone differently or whatever. But would I be mad too? Yeah, that does suck to have to feel like that.
Yeah, he validated his emotion.
Yeah, you get more buy-in, but you're saying, hey, maybe he's coming from this place, or maybe there's this, which I see that a lot. As someone's closing in on their exit polygraphs. Sometimes things clamp down a little bit. Sometimes they just want to see their guys do well. And I try to frame it under that. But usually if it's instead of just just suck it up, because then they dig their heels in.
And like we were talking about, maybe the JRA changed some of this, so feel free to tell me if it did. But, the association clause with sex offenders. Also, the internet is one now. A lot of them can't be on the internet and stuff. Well, today's world is all functioned by
Yeah.
that, and we can't surpass that. So it limits their job abilities. It limits their doing assignments for school. And I don't know if all that's changed with the JRI, but
they're more laxed on
movies
that.
were another thing, and that's what made me think of it.
Yeah.
Because
there are internet restrictions, but I think that if you have, so obviously like with our federal clients, they have monitoring. So in other words, it's like, like whatever you want. With the feds, it's weird because it's like they're more like, we're going to catch you, and then clients will still look at stuff. Whereas I think a client who's really proactive can say, I need access to the internet, but I don't want to look at that stuff. So can we install some sort of web filter on here and help me through that? Right. That is really good stuff that I get from some of those guys, because like you're talking about polygraphs. I mean, as a PO, I have to imagine if they've gone this long and then it comes out that they failed a polygraph, right?
Right.
I would naturally question what else is going on. And the way that we do polygraphs is it's kind of, it's done in a really economic way because like if I'm asking 3 questions, let's say I'm focused on porn and drugs and contact with children, right? Well, technically I should be doing 3 separate polygraphs, but unfortunately our clients can't afford that.
Right.
So we try to say, okay, tell me anything, right? Well, if I fail that, I may have failed on the pornography, but technically I failed the entire thing. And you, as the PO, have no clue. And, so now I'm like, okay, well, what else has he been up to? And I try to tell him, look, that is the worst case scenario. Telling me up front, if you're gonna go to jail, you're gonna go to jail then too. All you're doing is buying yourself time. In the meantime, of course it's looked at differently because it's not just the fact that you looked at porn. It's that you have lied about it for the entire time. Like, and then they have to question what else is up. And I usually tell them, control the narrative. Control the narrative. Your probation. You don't ever want another person telling that story because once you lose that narrative, then people don't write great chapters about you. I can't imagine.
Honestly, we did look at it. Like when I got a positive, or that they failed the polygraph, I'd be like, well, how did this just come up now? Like, what have you been hiding for so long? Yeah. So you're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
Right before I walked in, somebody showed me something or something.
Ed showed me.
Yeah. It was my friends.
Can you imagine?
I just had it there.
Can you imagine you send your client a text like, good luck on the polygraph. It's like a link to Pornhub. They're like, what? Gotcha, sucker.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wouldn't go well. Yeah.
What kind of things, like, I mean, you've been around a little, like, when did you start your career?
1992.
1992. Mm-hmm. So you've seen a lot of changes within the department just here in Utah, and you have some other experience elsewhere. Like, what are some things that you feel work well? Like in other words, that you, Randy, you're officially in charge of the world now, and
really?
More specifically AP&P going forward, or a probation agency in general. Like, what kind of things do you feel are most effective on your end of things, and maybe like if there's anything that you feel could be set aside or not given as much focus, what would that be?
You mean with AP&P or?
Yeah, and I'll open that up to not like you can answer that for supervising sex offenders, but like pretty well any client.
Kind of
Yeah. So I mean, how would you structure it, or what kind of things would you look for? What would you tell the agents that were under your charge as far as what to look for, or what to worry about, what not to worry about, that kind of stuff?
And I think I kind of said it before, and don't blanket everything. Don't put a statement or a stamp. They're a drug offender, they're a sex offender, they're this or that. But then, and I say that, but then you've got to target what their needs are. We could talk about risk needs and responsivity and all that stuff. But I think listening to people's story, understanding who they are and why they got to the place that they got, and not neglecting that. Because when you neglect that, I think you're already on the wrong path. You're on the one that you think got him there instead of on the one that got him there. But I really believe in targeting people individually. That's women, sex offenders, drug offenders, whatever. Like, respond to what they need, because they're all different. They all got there for different things, and I don't think we do a good job of that.
So it'll be a training item then.
Yeah. I think we could do. I think, the Department of Corrections in Utah has gotten more into gender responsivity with the women, which has been awesome. I think really we were doing that years before. I don't know, Karen Preverdale and some of the other agents over there, like we talked about it when they finally introduced it to us. We're like, we've been doing this for years, because we found that it was effective with women.
What kind of things? That's like what kind of things did you learn in the training, or what were you already doing specific to gender?
I think the way we spoke with them, understanding their relational issues and how they build support and how women are more talkative and all of those kind of things, and being there for that, I think was really helpful in watching those, and supervising those people. I think we were more effective when we were able to do that. I think women take a lot longer to supervise. You have to have that time to spend with them. And our caseload sizes didn't always pan out and let that happen like it should have until they started doing more gender responsive trainings and then lowered the caseload sizes and made them more manageable for us.
Did the gender responsive trainings shorten the amount of time that the women were on supervision, or
no?
Okay. So what was the
just probably made them more effective probation officers?
Yeah.
In terms of supervising.
being okay with it going longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Man, that's a curveball now with all the pronouns out now. Oh, she got to have 15 different gender responsive trainings now.
A lot of trainings.
Yeah. But I do think we were already responding to women differently, and that kind of gave us a context to work within.
Just naturally you'd figured it out, sort of.
Yeah, I think we just did. Because as a PO, when I first started, my caseload was I want to say 157.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
Jeez, wow.
And you're just putting out fires. And there was no training.
If
They
you
just
can even
said,
do
"Here,
that.
do it."
Wow.
You got to see 157 people once a month?
Back then, the standards were a little bit different. So the ones that were on lower supervision, we didn't have to see it all on the field. But even,
Wow.
I don't remember how many I had to see, but you could never get them all done. And you were just putting out fires.
Well, that'd be impossible.
Yeah.
So you would restructure it with lower caseloads. What's an ideal caseload? Okay, remember you're in charge of the
Depends
new.
on what kind of offender you're
5.
supervising.
Five.
All right.
The one thing I found is even when they lowered the caseloads, of course they were more manageable, but that gave you more time to get in the weeds. And sometimes you found more stuff in being able to do
sure.
that. So, it just depends.
Ideal. Let's do ideal
For women or for what?
Let's go male sex offense, female in general, drug abuse. So those 3 categories. So male sex offense, just females in general, substance abuse.
Females, I'd say no more than 40
Okay.
on a caseload.
Male sex offense.
You could probably do between 50 and 60.
Okay. And drug.
Drugs. They just keep you running. Probably 50 or 60 max
okay.
on that.
Okay.
What's the one that you'd feel comfortable with, 5,000 caseload?
None.
Yeah. Okay.
Impossible.
Yeah. What's the one that you would you'd feel which group would you feel most comfortable with having a big caseload? Bigger than the 3 categories you just gave numbers for. Yeah, like that.
Well, it would just depend on how often I had to see them and what risk level they were at.
Yeah, maybe I'm not asking the right question.
Yeah, that's a dumb question, dude.
I didn't call it dumb. No question's dumb.
I said it was dumb. It was asinine.
Yeah.
Well, if you had a bajillion offenders, what would they be?
Mace is jealous.
I do believe in, that if they're doing well, then don't interfere with their life. Don't keep putting more treatment and programming on them that complicates everything, because that would make them go downhill, and it did. So.
Yeah, treatment should be a punishment.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So-
No, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, so again, a lot of it would be training for, and if I'm hearing you right, individualized responses based on them seeing the client. Basically, a lot of the stuff we preach to our therapists, but then again, you have a very different job than therapists too.
Yeah. I do think a parole officer has to wear different hats, and if you're not willing to do that, I don't think you should be doing that job. It's not it's sometimes, you needed to be the officer and take him to jail, but not all the time. And if you weren't able to switch that, then you're not going to be effective.
Well, and from our side of the table too, on the job that we do, they get a lot more mileage out of their parolees or probationers, how you want to put it, at a time where they expect to be in trouble or expect to be taken back and then don't. Actually get hey, I understand. Yeah, go talk about it. That goes a long ways. Most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. That goes a long ways. Because I have that conversation all the time. Hey, you need to talk to your PO. And you could tell they don't want to. Yeah. And they come back actually, they were pretty cool about it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it just opens the door more that they'll be on.
I do think that because that builds that rapport.
Yeah.
And the trust. relationship.
So if you, so we should probably wrap this up, huh? So if you had to say to, I mean, it's always nice to have, if I'm a budding PO or I'm thinking about getting into that field or something, I find that to be something I want to get into. I mean, what message, I mean, you know, in 30 seconds or less, I guess, would you say that this is what you need to know going into this and this is going to help you be effective?
I think just, know that you have to wear those different hats. And the best advice I'd give them is to listen. Sit back and listen. I think a lot of people, we talk a lot. Mm-hmm. We tell you the rules. We tell you the parole agreement. But listen to what they have to say. Getting to know the person, being able to wear different hats over that. So, great. That's what I think.
Thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. You going to come back and visit us again? I
would love to.
Okay.
I love talking probation and parole. That was... I just
Glad
loved
we could
my career. It was
make your evening.
Career. Yeah.
Okay. You need to plug anything before we leave?
No.
Okay, great. Okay. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
Alrighty, folks, that does it for this episode of the Guerilla Social Work Podcast. We would like to thank you for taking the time to tune in. We also want to thank our guest, Randy, for spending some time with us, coming in, being willing to do an interview. We had a lot of fun with it. And we are going to be back on the next episode talking about suicide. So we will be here with Miss Nita Bakke. She was kind enough to come on to the show and talk with us about her work and dealing with suicidal clients. So don't want to miss out on this one. That will be the next episode, and we will see you then.